So now we get to crops. Jenny Park was a bread student of mine at John C. Campbell Folk School, and I just had to put her in there. They're nicer carrot pictures, but I loved her. I was so proud of this. She asked me to consult one fall, and I told her how to do winter gardening, and I said, you can grow any half-hardy vegetable straight through the winter as long as you use a combination of row cover and plastic, right? And then I saw her at the grower school in the spring. I said, how'd it work out? She said, oh, they all died. And I was like, huh, I've never had even partially hardy plants die if you use a layer of row cover and plastic. She said, oh, I forgot the row cover. So the next year, she used the row cover, and I was going back to John C. Campbell to teach winter cooking. And I was trying to find as many vegetables as possible, and I called Jenny up and said, how you doing? Did you get anything? She said, I got all kinds of stuff, Pat. Yeah, sure, I'll give you some. And she had these huge, wonderful carrots. It was January. Were they sweet? Were they delicious? So.
You put the plastic right on top of the row cover? Or?
Well, yeah, I have, in particular, I had big fields, right? Not huge, but like this size of this room each of parsnips and rutabagas one year. And I wanted them to go through the winter. I didn't put them in to what most people, that would be too late, like the end of July. But I figured if I kept them alive, they'd keep growing, and they did. We have those kind of winters, And I wasn't going to try and make a structure as big as this room, but I had plastic that big, so I just laid the row cover down and plopped the stuff on top. And somebody actually misunderstood. I wrote a winter gardening article. I talked about that. I said, be careful. I forget what they said. They got it wrong. I think they said it might be scary. It wasn't scary. It was dangerous because I was trying to walk and there was all this icy plastic, so it was very slippery. But it totally protected them, Mostly, though, you make a structure, But it does work for some things, and probably there's some damage here and there, but not major, But the point of this more is that you can grow carrots all the way through the winter. Almost all the vegetables we're talking about here, they're not going to miss a beat. I don't know that, not that when we get to the unusual incidentals, those are not going to make it. But they can go further than you would think, because in fact, to get crops from some of them, because they don't make their tubers until equinox, you have to give season extension, because they come from equatorial areas like Bolivia and stuff, Mashua. It's related to nasturtiums. We kind of already talked about that. The oca does not begin setting tubers until fall equinox. That's critical, right? So that's actually true of all these guys. You want to basically use season extension for these guys, right? If you don't use season extension, you're going to have tubers just starting to form, and then they're going to freeze and get killed, They start forming on equinox, and when do we get frost? Nowadays, middle of October, end of October usually, But the frost isn't that heavy then, and these guys with protection can easily take it, So you just put some row cover over them, and then maybe, if you're really adventurous, that plastic to get them to go into November, and then you'll get a significant harvest, Otherwise, you get an interesting taste, and it's pretty interesting. These things are pretty interesting, A tuber that tastes like a nasturtium, that's pretty interesting, But if you want to do more than just novelty level, you've got to do that protection. So, like I say, a season extension is a must for good harvest. The tubers have the same flavor as the nasturtiums. You can eat the flowers, you can eat the leaves, just like you can with nasturtiums. So it's a totally edible plant, but you even get to eat the tubers too. It's pretty fun. And for both of these, their reproductive, not organ actually, but the reproductive mode is the root, right? Unlike one that we're going to come to. And this one here I haven't grown, but this is the one that's related to Malabar spinach. And so I'm definitely going to try it because I like Malabar spinach a whole lot. Once again, you're going to have to do that season extension, but apparently the roots are very nice and they grow a lot of them in the Andes. And you can also eat the leaves. So it's, I think, a real winner. As far as getting these, probably just want to Google it. There's a bunch of these are available from Cultivariable, which is somebody who's part of the Seed Alliance, the Organic Seed Alliance. They have, if you look up Organic Seed Alliance, there's a whole bunch of very interesting people who are doing major seed experimentation, and this guy is one of them. And he actually wasn't even selling this year. He's just still, I'm not going to sell this year, I'm just doing other stuff. He's going to start selling again next year. So he's not in it for the money, he's in it for the adventure. And so he's got a bunch of interesting stuff there and a lot of good advice about how to grow these too. So I highly recommend that website, Cultivariable. Okay, carrots. One cool thing about carrots is they can take a lot of shade. And a lot of people really can't do the kind of gardening they want to. They can't grow much in the way of tomatoes. They might get 3 tomatoes on a spindly plant because they don't have but 6 hours sun a day or 5 hours sun a day. And you can make do with 5 hours of sun. You can be fine with 5 hours of sun and get a good yield, you know. It won't be as good as if it's full sun though. I mean, that's the energy source, right? I mean, you're just not going to get as much as if you have full sun. But you can make do, right? So if you only have a certain amount of full sun, you're going to put the things that have to have full sun there and put the carrots in the shade. And then come winter, right, you can sow the carrots out in the full sun because they'll keep growing and the tomatoes aren't going to happen. So you still get some carrots that get full sun and they'll probably be a better crop, but you'll get a crop, you know. And you know, I put the pH down because I had access to the information, but years ago I attended a workshop by the Lupkes. The Lupkes make controlled microbial compost. It's this very reliable, perfect compost of one sort, a bacterial sort of compost. But they're experts at it, and a lot of scientists use it because their compost is so reliable. So it makes like more standardized testing. And I was at their workshop and we were talking about pH, and they said, you know, really, organic matter and the activity created by organic matter buffers pH. It doesn't really matter. pH is really more about those chemical fertilizers that need a certain acidity to be available. You know, the life is going to figure out how to live there. Some life is going to figure out how to live there. If you have enough plants feeding that soil, there's going to be enough life to have that microbe poop, to have those microbe bodies, which is what the plants really want to be feeding on. So it's not nearly as important. And indeed, Dan Kitteridge said that, you know, if you do all the stuff he talks about for blueberries, pH doesn't even matter for blueberries. You know? And Bob Wells, who built our biochar plant, put a whole bunch of biochar on his blueberries one year, which is a mistake because biochar is very high pH. His blueberries look bad for 1 year, and next year, spectacularly good. So pH, it's good to know it. I kind of pay attention, but I don't sweat it either, you know. I mean, if it's way, way off, like 4 or 9 or something, then maybe I'd worry about it. But otherwise, not really. Maybe 8 even I'd worry about. But 7 something, I hardly ever see it. But if I do, I go, oh, we'll see what it is next time. I one time got to my farm after having been at the Highland Lake Inn for 5 years, and some other people had done a soil test because I'm in a community, and my pHs were all like 7, 7.5. I was like, what is going on here? But I just went forward and farmed. You know, I wasn't planning on putting a lot of calcium down in the first place because I hadn't looked at my soil test yet, and so I didn't do that. I didn't increase it. But by the next time I got a soil test, it was right back at like what it normally was. So either it was a graduate student thinking about their girlfriend or their boyfriend, or their test, or there was just some weird thing going on in the soil right then. Maybe it had been a drought. It could have been that it was a drought year actually, and that would change the pH. You know.
I'm in a similar situation in that I'm at a new farm and the pH is remarkably high. It's in the 7s. So you wouldn't sulfur,
I wouldn't do sulfur and stuff. I'd grow cover crops. You know, I'd put organic matter down. I wouldn't put a lot of compost down because compost has got a high pH too. I'd use some compost though. Make the compost, instead of making a lot of compost, make the best compost you can. You know, watch some of our videos, check out Dr. Ingham, you know, and make the best compost you can. And you want the compost not for nutrients, but for inoculation, for life, you know. That's really where we've ended up going with compost. We used to make compost for food. Now we make compost as a carrier of life, you know. The food, the plants grow the food. I mean, you got the sun. Who needs any more food than that, you know? I mean, that's a lot of food. But the life, you can never get too much life, you know. So, and the better, the more diverse, the better, yeah.
How do worm casings figure into that?
Very high salt, very fertile, lots of food, and lots of life. So you just go easy with it, use it. The rule of thumb that I learned from John Nielsen, and it's pretty true, I've ever seen mistakes be made, is never more than 20%. So you're making a potting soil, no more than 20%. And I wouldn't even want to do 20%. To me, that's high. And so if you put it in the soil, just think, you know, you got an idea how much the volume of the soil is. Are you anywhere near 20%? Probably not. You wouldn't have that much, you know. So you use it lightly. It's got all the life if you don't let it dry out. If you let them dry out, they're a medium for life, but the life is asleep at best, you know. But remember that if you were, you know, let's say you're doing worm castings and you did 20%, I would back way off on the azomite. I'd back way off on those high salt fertilizers because you're going to start getting too high. You're going to start seeing problems, you know. And indeed, yeah.
Would that be the same for the tea from the worms? Because, you know, it's always coming out.
Well, okay, the tea, you're using way less castings for the tea. It's real dilute, so it shouldn't be high salt, you know. Yeah. Worm castings make great tea, you know.
Well, I'm even talking about in the bin.
Oh, that tea. That's not tea. That's a marketing ploy.
Okay.
That is not tea, and you shouldn't think of it as tea. It's leachate. Okay? It has not gone through the worm's gut and can have any array of microbes and diseases, you know. It's fine to use it, but you would use it as a fertilizer right at the base of a plant. And if you're following NOP, National Organic Program, or any of the GAP stuff, you would put a mulch over it so it's incorporated, and you wouldn't sell that food, or if you really believed all their stuff, eat that food for 90 days if nothing touches where that stuff was, or 120 if it touched, because there's a possibility of pathogens. I think they're over the top, to tell you the truth. That's a little extreme, but you know, some caution is worth it there. You know, I'm unhappy that they call that tea. You know, it's not tea. Maybe what happened is they were calling it tea before we started making compost tea, but it's not tea that's been purposely made with compost that you've tested and made sure that it doesn't have pathogens in it. You know, and or worm castings, which if you get pure worm castings, you know you won't have pathogens, you know. It's stuff that you know could most certainly have pathogens. Now, probably not human pathogens if it's just vegetable scraps, but if it's post-consumer, it could be your pathogens, you know. Or if you had a guest that was sick, you know, or if you had a guest come in. And really where that stuff is serious is for the young and the old and the immune compromised. For them, it's real serious, you know. For most of us, yeah, we run into microbes all the time, you know. Sometimes we may get a little bit of that stuff, but we don't even notice it. But for people that it matters to, it matters a whole lot. So it's worth some consideration, you know. Carrots are way hardy. That's why Jenny could grow them into January. But without protection, the top would freeze too fast, get soft, and it would rot down and kill the carrot. So you don't have to use what she used. She was getting them to grow. She was actually getting, that's how big some of those were. She was taking that row cover off on the nice days and leaving the plastic on unless it got up to the 60s, and then she'd even take that off. And so they were growing straight through the winter, right? And you can do that. The other thing you could do, though, is get them up to size and just bury them in leaves and leave them in the ground, unless you have voles. You know? Then you can't do that, but you can if you don't have voles. And they'll store wonderfully. The ground won't freeze, so you can harvest them even on the coldest days. And of course, the ground is going to be good and cold, it just won't freeze, so they're going to be sweet as can be. You know? So it's a great way to store them. And that's true for beets, it's true for parsnips, it's true for a bunch of them. You know? But you got to have enough leaves that the soil doesn't freeze. If it freezes, you can't get them out. And if it freezes, there's probably going to be some damage. It won't wipe out the whole root, but it'll start that place where rot happens. Just like I didn't really cover when I talked about mechanical damage. I went right to, I got to admit, I'm a little fascinated with Aspergillus. It's a pretty amazing disease. You know, I kind of enjoy it, even though it drives me nuts. The other piece that I didn't mention there is insect damage. And that can be a serious issue for carrots and parsnips because of the carrot rust fly. So you want to try and get control over that. Rotation is a great way to get control over it. And this, oftentimes, for people that have smaller growing areas, rotation's a joke. You try to rotate for harlequin bugs, good luck, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, oh, you went 50 feet away. The harlequin bug can't figure out to go over there? I don't think that's happening, you know? Now, we go 4 houses away, and it works, you know, because there's trees and houses in between. But for the carrot rust fly, because the cycle's in the soil, that's a big area. You just have to get it from where it is right there, and you're good, you know? But if you don't do that, they'll chew on it, and that won't necessarily hurt the plant, but secondary rots will destroy those carrots, you know? And the only time I really suffered from carrot rust fly was on parsley at the Highland Lake Inn. Couldn't grow parsley. Just kept getting wrecked by carrot rust fly. Finally, I got beneficial nematodes, learned how to use them, took care of it, you know? The problem is, I thought that I had beneficial nematodes figured out. No, I just was having a good couple of years. You know, they're not, we get them to work about maybe 60% of the time here. Basically, you need to have the perfect rain to get them to work. But we'll talk about that a little bit more because that is one of the solutions to a lot of problems for pests. Is obviously these are soil plants, so the pests are going to be in the soil, and beneficial nematodes can solve that problem. Ideal spacing 2 to 3 inches, but the truth is, I'll sow carrots with an earthway, and to make sure I get a good stand, I'll usually make a row, come back and make a row right next to it, make another row, because I want to have carrots eventually spaced like that, which means that when they're all germinated and stuff, they're really close together. There's lots of them, right? But they're not so close together that I don't get little carrots like finger size when I pull them out. So I wait till that point, and then I pull them out and they go in salads. And if there's like a place where they didn't do well, but there's a clump in the middle, so let's say there's like 6 inches where only one clump of 4 carrots came up, right? I'll just say, okay, that clump gets to stay. They'll push against each other, and they'll be a little bit misshapen, but they've got the space to grow. And Elliot Coleman teaches that with all kinds of root crops. He just says basically, he uses soil blocks. He'll put 2 or 3 seeds to a cell, and he'll just space them further apart. So he'll go, okay, if I had the proper spacing here, let's say it's every 3 inches, right? It'd take 9 inches to grow three carrots. So he'll put that in the middle and leave 4.5 inches on either side. And then he didn't have to plant as many, he didn't have to thin as many, and the carrots just, they might not be as perfect, but they'll work that way. And so I don't really do that as much. I try and do it some here, but the rest of my coworkers don't like it at all. It bothers them. I find them pulling them off, pulling them out. It's like, oh well, I'm not going to waste that seed. But I really like it for not having to thin as much. I can find a place, any place I feel like there's enough room around that area, I don't thin. So that's very general as far as that spacing goes. But people usually want a guideline, and I got a great book that had the guidelines, and so I just put them there for you. By the way, the book is out of print, but if you have a penchant for going online and searching the used book things online, or the stores and stuff, it's called The Garden Problem Solver by Jeff Ball. It's by Rodale Press. A later one came out, and I don't like it as much. I like the older one. In some ways it's out of date. It's way out of date, and he keeps going carrots. What carrots are good for greenhouses? You can't grow carrots in a greenhouse. It's a great book because it just got all this kind of stuff, just right there. Plus it covers the major bugs, and most of the advice is pretty good. It's not, it wasn't. I don't think he talks about using rotenone, which is a big bad poison, very much at all, if at all. Turns out that rotenone also was a cause of Parkinson's disease, so it was not all that organic after all. You had to misuse it probably, but there are people who got Parkinson's from exposure to it. Anyway, soil temperature for germination. This one's pretty important. I actually wrote an article for the Express about this years ago. Essentially, for some crops, beet is an example. I figured out over the years, and peas are another example, that getting beets and peas out real early is a total waste. Anybody ever notice that? You get those beets and peas out late February, and they struggle and they're growing, and you got your stuff in, and they're going to be there. You're going to get them, right? But then you do your second sowing, and it's way ahead of those guys in no time flat, because it didn't wear itself out, using up all of its carbohydrates trying to stay alive. Knowing the soil temperatures, just because it'll germinate at 55, probably I'm not going to do it. I'm probably going to wait till it's 60, But actually this is good because it says best air temperature. Usually if it's soil 55, the air temperature is going to be colder than 65, So just because you can get germination, and actually for some things it's fine actually. Spinach doesn't seem to much matter. If it gets up, it'll just wait its time and do fine. It can take the cold. So it's not everything, but you just watch your plants and see who's happy to get out there way early and who can't stand it, Baby white turnips, they don't seem to mind it at all. They just sit there, they get yellow from the cold, whatever, but as soon as it gets warm, boom, and they're ahead of the ones that I plant in succession. So you just watch them and see which one is, but knowing what soil temperature it likes helps you to decide if you're even going to bother, And then best air temperature 45 to 75, So, right, that's fall and spring, right? That summertime temperature, not so good, Days to germination, 10 to 17. I've seen it be longer than that if you're in that 55-degree temperature, But that's also a function of moisture, and real often, that time of year, it's really arid. I mean, it's really, there's not any humidity, and the wind's blowing a lot, so it's very hard to keep your soil moist, Now you have to keep it reasonably moist, of course, or the carrots will die. Once they got that radicle out, if they go bone dry, they're done. But you're probably not getting ideal moisture, and so you're not getting as rapid a germination as you would later on when all of a sudden there's humidity in the air and the wind isn't blowing so much. Basically, later on I say make sure you got your minerals figured out if you want your plants to do well. But here's an example. With carrots, if you got brown curled margins, and actually it also said if it's kind of, the inside leaves are looking kind of grayish too, it's likely a potassium deficiency. And potassium is going to be a big one for roots. You really want to make sure your potassium's in good shape. Very often around here it's not a big deal, especially if you're putting your wood ashes in your garden. Probably you should put less in. They're really strong. But it does mean you won't have any potassium problems. But you want to be pretty judicious about how much wood ash to use. But also, if you put a lot of leaves in your compost, lots of potassium in those leaves. You get a lot of mulch from hay mulch, lots of potassium. So we got lots of potassium sources. So it usually isn't a problem. But if perchance it is, and how it could be, our greenhouse where we mulch not nearly as much, we mostly grow cover crops and knock them down and plant through them. And we grow tons of tomatoes. Guess what tomatoes use a lot of, right? After a few years of not rotating, we can actually have potassium problems in the greenhouse. We've actually used potassium sulfate because we were low. But everywhere else where we test, we're not low in potassium. But if you were to be, so later on I say, I'll just say it again now, if I'm growing roots and I haven't done it before, I don't know how my soil performs, I'm going to make sure my boron's right, I'm going to make sure my potassium's right, I'm going to make sure my phosphorus is right. I'm going to make sure my calcium's right too, but the ones I'm going to really feel the most are going to be those three. The other minerals are going to matter, but those are going to really, well, 4, including the boron. Okay, and then finally, if you got heavy soils, the Chantenay and the Amsterdam types. The Amsterdam are those little round ones. The Chantenay are those kind of like blunt ones, like big tops and narrow. They're going to be better because they're not going to try and push their narrow, thin little root down in the soil. They're going to grow more up top, So, okay, celeriac. I love this one. It's really, how many people have enjoyed celeriac? It's pretty fascinating. I really love it in soups. I also like to roast it, and I like it shredded and grilled too. Anyway, you can use the leaves. They're stronger, but you can use them. They're not going to hurt you. It tastes like celery, but it's got a little bit more like on the nutty side, I'd say something like, But that's a weird, lots of things people say taste nutty. They don't taste nutty to me, but I get kind of a bit of a, like more depth of some sort, which I might call nutty, or more earthy, I guess, or something, It's a little different. But I enjoy it, The critical thing to know is that if it's got like a week of 50-degree weather, below 50-degree weather, right, it's going to vernalize. It's going to think it went through a year, it's a biennial, and it's going to bolt, okay? So this is not one you want to try and rush out. But actually, that's not hard to accomplish because it takes 10 weeks to get the seedlings up big enough to put out. And you're probably not going to direct seed this one. I think they have the description there for direct seeding, but they're going to be tiny little things, and it's going to be pretty hard to protect them, especially, when you're busy with the whole garden, because by the time you're sowing those, you're going to be pretty busy in your garden. So I recommend starting them as seedlings and not putting them in a huge pot, because then they'll take even longer, More like a 128, or the small, there's the big 6-packs and the small 6-packs, the small 6-packs. Give them their time. Make sure they got some size on them. Like I mentioned, try to keep them away from any source of 6-spotted leafhopper, or actually not so much the leafhopper, but the plants that they're feeding on, goldenrod being one. And really, if you can go out there and look at our goldenrod, and you'll see all kinds of distortions on the plants, and that is it. And so then you'll know, and you can go look at your plants and see, and you'll know if you got it. But actually, if you're not seeing the problem, you don't have it. On the other hand, maybe you've grown roots and they never got big, and you wondered why. It could easily be that was aster yellows. That's one of the effects on carrots and stuff, is that they just don't size up. They make the root, but they never get the size on them. With the celeriac, it's just that really nasty, distorted head, top. And it's something real important to know about celeriac. Sometimes we go ahead and eat diseased plants anyways, but something you should really think about is do not be a Spartan. Do not eat it because it's good for you, even though it doesn't taste good. If it tastes bad, it could be toxic. Celery, in response to disease, has made workers get sick just by working in the fields. The chemicals it makes when it reacts to disease are real intense. So if you get aster yellows on your celeriac, don't eat it. Just any diseased celery, much as I hate it, into the compost pile. The other one that I know for sure that that's true of, you got summer squash and it tastes bitter, don't eat it. It's toxic. And you don't like it anyways, right? So why bother? You're not a child anymore. You're not eating your bitter squash because you have to clean your plate. Just let it go. Okay, so they want a lot of space because they can get nice and big. So I give them about 10 inches. Once again, not a real heavy feeder. Compost and cover crops in the preparation beforehand, and the minerals and stuff will probably do you fine. You're not going to need a whole lot more than that. And so it was phosphorus, not potassium. That's the skinny stalk. Oh no, the cracked stalks was boron deficiency. Potassium was out of it completely. But those are indications of disease. And like I said, very susceptible to aster yellows. See, now this has happened. Now that you know this disease, you're going to find out you have it. Years ago, I got to California, and my first gardening friend told me about all the bugs he didn't have. And he had hardly any because it's dry there. But every time I walked in his garden, I'd see one of those bugs. One of the ones he said he didn't have, and he finally said, "Stop, stop." And I said, "What do you mean, stop?" He said, "You're depriving me of my first defense against bugs." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Denial." Parsnips. And actually, I put this in there just for the fun of it. That's the parsnip foliage. Looks like, you know what that is right there, that big black ball? Yep. That is the parsley worm. Anybody know that one? You probably all know the tomato hornworm, right? Yes. Yeah. Similar worm. It's got a horn, and it does the same kind of thing. If you leave it alone, it'll just clean up that plant. I mean, you could see the size poop. It's eating pretty fast, But, you know what its adult parent is? A blue swallowtail butterfly. Am I going to kill that? No. What I'm going to do is grab it and wait till I find a Queen Anne's lace and put it on the Queen Anne's lace. Because it's just too cute, too pretty. I can't kill it. But I'm not going to let it stay there. I mean, these little parsnips here would never make it. I put this in because this is the parsnips I told you about, the ones that didn't do so good. It's in that field, the heavy clay. We did a no-till thing, so we just barely worked up the soil. We didn't try and loosen that heavy clay, and it went in late. It was a total loser, not an impressive crop, Once again, they don't need a whole lot of sun, so if you need to have a shade-loving plant, this is one you can have. They're really hardy. They could take a lot of cold. Yeah?
On the celeriac, are you potting up from the 128s that you said it was 3 months before transplanting size?
10 weeks. It takes that long to get to fill that out. They're really slow to go, If for some reason the weather wasn't good and I had to go 12 weeks, I'd definitely step it up, If it was just a little rainy, I got a trick I do always with this kind of thing. If it's made a nice root ball and it's just like, oh, I should get them in now, or they're going to start going around the bottom, but the root ball's holding together well, and I can plant the middle of next week. Because they've got a good root ball, I can just soak that flat really well and kind of like, this is what, if you're growing a lot of plants you would never do this on a small scale because you couldn't stand the thought of hurting any of them. I would just take that and bang it once and knock it over and they'd all fall out. And 95% of those root balls would hold together perfectly. I'd then take some good potting soil and fill it about 1/4 of the way up in the same pot, stick them right back in again. Because I don't want to step it up because I want to get them outside because now it's warm enough and I don't want them to be making just a little root ball, I want them to make a big root ball. So that's why I don't step them up, And I purposely keep them in a small one so it's not 12 weeks. I don't want it to be 12 weeks. I want it to be big enough that I can keep track of it. And this year we did that. They were big enough, but they weren't big enough where we put it. We're having a probably chipmunk problem, and every one of our celeries and now a bunch of our Chinese cabbage and stuff are getting eaten by not a groundhog, not a deer, little tiny bites, 1 or 2 plants a night, but consistently steady, just a big pain, So we didn't get any celeriac this year. It all got eaten, So I kind of wished I had stepped it up. Maybe some would have made it. It's best if it's allowed to overwinter. They would definitely benefit from some row cover, but they'll make it through the winter on their own. They won't probably get a lot of damage if they get frozen. They tend to be able to take it pretty well. And like I said, come springtime, they're going to have that core, but they're going to be really sweet, really good. I put a heavy mulch around them if I'm not going to use the cover. And I might even put some mulch around them if I am going to use the cover, just to make sure there's no damage to that crown. And to make it so I can dig them even on the coldest days. It's nice to not be controlled by the weather. If you've come to other talks I've given, once you're aware of it, you don't really want to eat greens in the wintertime on cloudy days because they can be too high in nitrogen. And so you got to kind of figure your harvest out to the sunny days. These guys, you don't have to worry about it. They're not really getting enough nitrogen now. Their leaves are pretty much died back. And you can just mulch them out, and with that cover over and stuff, they're going to be fine. And so basically just cut out the core and use them. Parsley root. It can take some shade. It is also very hardy. It's actually a heavier feeder, but only when it's young, because once any plant's making a root, you don't want to feed it a lot because then you're going to be pushing it. You're pushing the energy the wrong way. But to get started, you can give this a few feeds, to get a good sized plant. It's not going to make much of a root for about half of its growing season, and I think it's about 100 days or so to finish. And so, the first 25 to 40 days, you can push it, get some size on it so that it's going to keep going and make a big root, once it does. Then in the catalog, they said to soak the seeds because germination is very slow. Though I've had it happen faster than they indicate. They're saying something like 20-some days. I've had it happen in 10 days or something like that. But it was ideal conditions. It was warm out and rainy, and cloudy, so it never really dried out, and that's pretty perfect. They also say you got to get it in way early, but I've started at mid-June and it works. I used to know, there's one catalog that says to wait till mid-August, I think because they wanted to be sure that it didn't get any heat, so it was nice and sweet, and the mid-August ones never made anything for me. They just never got enough size on them before our climate here. Partly I think maybe that's a sunnier climate. I think at a certain point in the fall here, even though it's warm and you have a certain amount of daylight, you don't have very much light because we get pretty cloudy a lot in the fall, and so that cuts back on it. Jerusalem artichokes are sunchoke, one of the few Native American foods that we consume. It's and I'm trying to think of what the other ones are. Wild rice is another one. Sunflowers, there aren't a lot of foods that we didn't bring here. There's a bunch that came up from Central America, but ones that actually are native to North America. Jerusalem artichokes are one of them. It is wildly productive if you do handle it right. Further down at the bottom, I say if you don't thin it, you're going to get really tiny ones. They'll just if you don't harvest it, actually mainly. If you harvest it, you are thinning it, and you'll get everyone you can. Of course, you won't get them all, and then they're nicely spaced again. But if you don't do that, then they just make tons of little plants, and you get lots and lots of ones that are like that big. And it's not worth digging for Jerusalem artichokes that are that size. But if you get them thinned right, I've ever seen some that have fallen over because the pile of artichokes was so big underneath that it kind of tipped it over. I mean, you can get a lot of artichokes from a patch that's healthy. There's a chef who used to teach cooking at the market at the French Bug Food Co-op where I used to sell. And I said one time, before I learned to grill them, that they were called Jerusalem artichokes because supposedly their flavor evoked artichoke. And he said, yeah, Pat, but you have to smoke the leaves to get that. He said he just never got it really, right? And then I had a George Foreman grill, and I figured I was grilling vegetables. I threw those on there, and boy, do you taste artichoke. That kind of caramelization. That winter cooking class I did, the idea was to see how to make as many recipes using only vegetables from our area. And we used Jerusalem artichokes as a substitute for globe artichoke, and it worked. But a key thing, because we did a dinner here, and Mara was wanting to do a root soup, and I said, we got lots of artichokes. But I didn't really mean for her to make it as much artichokes as she did. I saw later on that the rest of it was in the soldier fly bin, because everybody that ate that soup had horrible gas. And unless they've been eating lots of artichokes and similar high inulin foods. So it's about inulin, right? Which is a carbohydrate that doesn't even get digested in our stomachs. It's got to get into our lower intestines, and then bacteria totally digest it. But the process, what do? I mean bacteria, fermentation, you know. So gas, bloating, you know, not fun, you know. But if you're eating the right amounts, it's actually wonderfully feeding. It's considered probiotic. It's feeding that bacteria. So the trick is not to not eat it, but to slowly eat it. You know, start out. And so another trick is it's some of those carbohydrates have turned to sugars that are more digestible once it's had lots of cold. So I don't, even when if you're a farmer and it's October, you want things to sell. My artichokes were ready. Other people were selling them, I wouldn't sell them because it hadn't been cold enough yet. I didn't want people to go home and have that gas. I wanted to come back and buy them again and again, you know. And then another thing is to cook them a lot. And those three things, you know, will make it so that you're not quickly discouraged from eating Jerusalem artichokes. And frankly, I'm never going to eat them like they're mashed potatoes. You know, they're not mashed potatoes. They're Jerusalem artichokes, and they're high in this thing called inulin, which is really good for diabetics. Has all kinds of other great benefits. It's really high fiber. It's great stuff, but in moderation as you get used to it. You know, and it's also in yacon. It's in a bunch of things. Okay, if they're neglected, they can become invasive. They can become invasive. Believe me, Indeed, although folks tend to think that it produces only tubers, I can tell you because I haven't been using my garden in silo, so I haven't been moving around by cultivation and stuff, they're jumping all over the place. Once they get established, they start making seed. So they can really take over. The thing is, to me, it's not a big deal. Just start eating them. You know, keep eating them. And the biggest ones are always on the outer edges, so where do I start digging first? The outer edges. So what am I doing? I'm knocking them back, you know. And anytime they get ahead of you and they're taking over, just mow them. You know, mow them when you're mowing your grass. They're going to run out of steam. You know, they're not going to be able to make it. You know, and if you really can't get them, then put some cardboard on top of them. They're not Bermuda grass. They're not mugwort. You know, they can be controlled. And to not grow them because they can be invasive is, to me, silly. It nourishes the beneficial bacteria in our lower intestine, actually. When you first put them in particular, I think as they get more established and stuff, the deer have eaten enough that they're getting tired of it. Maybe they're getting gas from the leaves. I don't know. But when I first tried to establish them in a few places, I had to protect them. The deer tore them up. But then later on, when I had a nice... Also, I guess I had so many that I didn't notice the deer. That's probably it. The deer are never eating that much of anything, probably. But if it's our gardens, they're, of course, eating the stuff we care the most about, so we notice it. You know? And so that's probably what's going on. It probably isn't that they stopped eating it. It's just that I'm not noticing it anymore because I've got an established patch. Okay, yacon. Yacon is a pretty wild plant. Anybody ever grow it or know it or see it? Pretty amazing, isn't it? It is huge. It makes a lot of food. Pretty fascinating food. It's real crispy and sweet and kind of juicy. It's nice in summer and winter salads. Did you notice a little bit of a weird taste someplace in there though? Is it bitter or isn't there a little bit of an aftertaste that isn't perfect? But in a salad with dressing, I don't notice it at all. You know, or grilled in a marinade. You know, so I use it certain ways. You know, because I'm not. You know, it's not like that's a perfect flavor for me. It's not a peach. You know, but or maybe it's more like a California peach. You know, it's not a Georgia peach. You know, and once again, the inulin is good for you, and it's in there. You know, and once again, you learn to use it in a way that it works. You know. When I first got these, I got Abundant Life Seed Company was a seed catalog that used to be around. They were always like really on the edge. They're the ones that taught me about growing potato seeds, you know, and they were just real adventurers. And one year they offered for like $15 3 sets of tubers. And it was the Mashua, the nasturtium tuber, the oca, and yacon. I put them all in and didn't get very big yields on the oca. I didn't know about equinox, right? So I didn't worry about frost taking them out. When I dug them, I was pretty disappointed. But I did get to taste them. They were pretty fascinating. I played with them again. Eventually I learned about, you know, keeping them going after equinox. But this one here, I put it in and I was blown away, man. The plants are just like this wide, this tall, or taller, you know. Huge, gorgeous plants, you know, just lovely. They have a wonderful architectural structure to them. And then I dug them and I was like, wow. But I didn't notice. I'm pretty observant usually. Right there, you see that little reddish area? And we're going to see a better picture of it in a minute. There's another right there and right there. That's the reproductive part. The tubers, plant all you want, they'll never grow. So I taught my friend Yana Fishman, the sweet potato grower, about yacon. But she doesn't remember me as being the person that introduced her to it because what I gave her never grew. She had to talk to another friend who sent her what grew. And I didn't know. I had to learn that. It took me about 2 years to learn it myself. Because I planted those guys out and they didn't grow at all. There's nothing on them that's going to grow. But those little, I call them corms. I don't know if they're really corms or not, but they're kind of like that. They're just this little guy at the top, and that's what you plant. They're crisp and they're sweet. They're productive. The inulin, you want to be careful. But frankly, I don't know that it's got a taste that I want to eat tons of it anyways. Some crunch with the sweet, masking that other flavor that I don't quite like that much. That's about how I want to use them. The sad thing that I wasn't aware of is they don't store it all well in refrigerators. So my second crop, which was huge, once I learned to do that, I had a bunch in. I jammed them in my fridge. And I was eating a couple. I noticed they were starting to go, and I thought, okay, I got to eat these fast and I'll get to the other ones. By the time I got to the other ones and the crispers, I filled both crispers with them. They were all gone, totally rotted, And it wasn't very long at all. So you can store them in a coolish basement or coolish room, but kind of like sweet potatoes and stuff, they're not a refrigerator storage item. If you want a good yield, I'd start them indoors and get the plants pretty big. Do you start yours inside?
I've just grown them from plants. I didn't really do much reproduction.
You didn't grow them from okay, right. Yeah, so then you got them from somebody that had started them already. Right. Yeah, right. So I'd start them at least 4 weeks ahead. If you're ambitious, you can start them even earlier than that. Just put them in a big pot. You'll get more yacon if you do that. The leaves actually make a tea that's helpful to diabetics and blood sugar regulation. I think you can even go to the health food stores now and see yacon supplement. And I think that's mostly the leaf. I give them about 3 feet. How big did yours get? Does that seem about right to you? Yeah. Yeah. They get big. And they can get tall. They're pretty impressive. That's about it for that.
So you're planting those in the spring? Or?
Yeah, spring, totally. They do not take a frost. No, they're going to die. They're from Bolivia and the Andes, and they're not going to freeze. A light frost isn't going to be a problem, but a hard freeze, you'll never see anything of them again. They have to come in. And what I do is I don't even break those things off the plant. So let's go back for a minute here. So I'd come in and I break all of these guys off the plant. You don't even bother to leave the little ones, right? I guess you can leave the little ones because they'd be feeding these guys, so I might do that. If they're too small to bother with, I'd probably leave those on because they'll feed those guys, But you break all the other ones off and you eat them, but I leave the rest of it right on there. It's just going to keep better. I wouldn't break them all off like in the other picture. If it's on there, it's still dry. You probably have learned that, right, with weeds and stuff. You knock a weed down and you come by later on and it was not even in flower when you knocked it down, but now it's flowered and set fruit, set seed, because it's going to use every last bit of life from the dead plant to make the seed. Everybody agrees in that plant, one goal, make seed, So by leaving it on there, you're just going to have a more viable reproductive part. Okay, salsify. I only managed to get a couple to live here this year. I put them out with these paper pots. John had been here and he brought his paper pot machine, I hoped. Anyways, he made these paper pots which we planted these guys with, and a lot of them didn't do very well, but a couple made it. Unfortunately, they look so much like grass that they all got weeded out. So be wary. And believe me, it's perfectly, you can see why you would pull that out. It doesn't look like a plant like we normally grow. Looks like a weed. Okay. Yeah, well, but it's, either way, it's easy to do, It doesn't look like anything we know. It looks a lot like grass, So you got to be careful when they're coming up. That's what the root looks like. First time I had it, I bought it for our housewarming. I was making a vegetarian gumbo. Its other name is oyster. And I thought it would have a good oyster flavor. I don't know. Got to smoke the leaves, I guess, to get that flavor, But it's an interesting flavor. I like it, It's not something I grow all the time, but I like to have it when I do it. Just like, get another, flavor in there and do a special dish with it. It's just like, I just discovered my neighbor's got a quince that's covered with little quinces, and I've never had quince. I know I'm not going to eat quince all the time, but I'm darn sure going to make it, a few times and get to learn what it's about. Maybe I'll fall in love with it, you never know. But from so far when I taste it, I don't think so. But I think that's about where I am with this. I like it, but it's not high on my list, you know, so I grew it this year because we had the class. And I'm tickled to know it's out there. It'd be interesting to see if anything's big enough yet. I don't think it will be, but I might, during a break, try and run over and see. By the way, do we need to do that?
We do need a break.
Yeah, I just get going, so
Yeah.
let's do a break, okay?